This is Searching for Lost Lutherans. I am the Reverend Dr. Chris Suehr. Welcome all of you to Lower Susquehanna Synod Edification Day. I am so happy to be with you this morning. And without further ado, let's get on to some presentation. Here we are, Searching for Lost Lutherans. Who am I? Oh, well, I'm Pastor Chris Suehr. My last name's pronounced Suehr, like what you do to a steak, but I usually just go by Pastor Chris. Last year, I completed my PhD at Catholic University. The title of my dissertation was Belonging, Affiliation, and Protestant Cultural Identity in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Basically, I looked at the changes that have been happening throughout American Lutheranism and throughout American mainline religiosity all around. Some of my major contributions here after the survey of the field is I very closely scrutinized ELCA data, all those parochial reports that you filled out just a couple months ago. Well, thank you for doing that. Please continue to do so. I used the data from those, analyzed it, and compared it to some other research that's out there. I also performed several dozen interviews with former Lutherans, especially ones, all of them were former Lutherans who currently live in the Lower Susquehanna Synod turf. I also am very familiar with this synod. I've been around in a number of capacities as a worshiper, as a leader. I have supplied at a few dozen congregations, so many of you I might have seen or met once or twice along the road. I'm currently finishing a bridge ministry over in Shippensburg and getting ready to begin a call in York Springs, Pennsylvania. So let's get right into this. I'll say that I've structured this presentation today around some comments, conversations, common things that I hear about what's going on with the church. We're going to look at those closer and see how the reality actually is about those. So we'll take these comments, we'll analyze them, and then we'll look at the research, the data, all of that, and what it suggests is really going on here. So let's get started. First one, soccer killed the church. Oh, soccer. How many of us have heard and said that? It's soccer's fault. Something that's often pointed to is the Luther League. The Luther League was an organization that existed from the late 1800s, the 1890s, until the 1970s. I know it was commonly known for its baseball, but it was a sort of confraternal church organization among Lutherans. There's this thing in sociology called structural differentiation. The idea is that large organizations like the church had a multitude of functions at one time. With structural differentiation, little pieces of what they do get splintered off out into the world, into their own thing, sort of taking away from the collection of activities that a certain organization does. A church's example might be baseball, for example. If the church hosted the baseball league, well, now you can go to a little league organization. You could go to the YMCA. You could see what the local police athletic complex is doing, and they have their baseball. So baseball that might have been a former part of the church is less so. This is very expansive, though. Group organizations and belonging are declining broadly and in general. Fraternal organizations, all sorts of places where people used to congregate, social organizations are all in decline. This also includes bowling leagues. There was a great study done by Robert Putnam years ago called Bowling Alone, where the number of bowlers has been relatively steady, mild change in the number of bowlers, but bowling leagues have been decimated. Fewer people belong to bowling leagues. And this is reflective of what goes on in organizations all around. Structures have been differentiating. The reality of this is, yes, soccer is at most a symptom of something else that's going on. Soccer didn't take over Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings opened up and soccer was there to fill in. Though not every league, right? Soccer's not always the bad guy here. All right, next one. People just don't think church is important anymore. They don't. Well, some of the data says that religious practice is not a given anymore. You know this. You don't need piles of articles to know that people practicing their religion regularly is not a given anymore. But more so, irreligiosity itself, being a nun or an atheist or agnostic or just non-religious, it's a viable social position. You know, long ago, it was still considered very antisocial, and in some circles it is. But in American culture, if you're irreligious, you'll generally not be persecuted for it. The 1950s, the post-war boom of the church when pews were at their fullest, that was the anomaly. That vision that we have, that is unusual historically. Now, I have pointed out here Dean Kelly. Dean Kelly performed a very important study in 1972. He was commissioned by the Federal Council of Churches to examine why churches were beginning to decline. That's in 1972. He was looking at why mainline churches were beginning to decline. It's been going on for a while. But with people thinking church is not important anymore, with that attitude, well, the onus is on us for that. Why is church important to you? And why should church be important to the people that you encounter? That's something we need to chew on. Part of our job as evangelists is to demonstrate the importance of faith and faith practice in our own lives. Connected to this, people aren't teaching their kids the faith. They're just not. I do have to say, did people ever really teach their kids the faith? If you've ever read Luther's Introduction to the Small Catechism, it is a hoot. Here's a little segment from it. Luther writes, "The deplorable, miserable conditions which I recently observed when visiting the parishes have constrained and pressed me to put this catechism of Christian doctrine into this brief, plain, and simple form. How pitiable, so help me God, were the things I saw. The commoner, especially in the villages, knows practically nothing of Christian doctrine. And many of the pastors are almost entirely incompetent and unable to teach." Nothing new under the sun, right? We have always had the job to teach, and people always start out not knowing. Part of the job. I will say this, though. Let's tangent to a sociological reality about kids. There's something called differential fertility, as you can see, and emerging adulthood that are sociological factors at play here. Differential fertility is simply the fact that some groups of people, however you group them, groups of Christians, groups of anything, are having more kids, and some are having fewer kids. Mainline Protestants and Lutherans are in the group of people who are having fewer kids. And not only are we having fewer kids, we're having fewer kids later. So the generations are smaller and further spaced apart. There are fewer babies, simply put around. Something connected to this is something called emerging adulthood. It's a new phase of life that's being studied. You know, you go from adolescence to young adulthood to this period called emergent adulthood before full adulthood. This is, I think, also putting a label on something that's probably pretty apparent to most of you already. This is connected to something called reproductive evangelism, filling the pews by making more people. In short, that is in major decline, especially in the mainline and especially in Lutheranism. So let's show a little bit about this. Here's some of the data based on our parochial reports here. We don't have the exact rates of birth. We don't report that, but we do report baptisms. So that's our closest estimate. As you can see here, for a long time, more Lutherans were being born than were dying in a given year. So we've actually tended to gain more people through that way. That only very recently in 2016-17 really started to overlap. But historically, we have had a few more people being born than dying, but that went down and is now neutralized. So the reality right now is that there are fewer cradle Lutherans, fewer Lutherans being born, and I dare say there's not much that we can do about that. I think encouraging reproductive evangelism is not really an avenue that we should pursue. I'll just get that on the record. Next. Okay, I hear this, and you've said it. Here we are. They will come back. They'll come back when they finish college. Maybe they will. Numerous studies about religiosity changing in college are largely inconclusive. There is a pile of studies that say people become less religious in college. There is a equal-sized pile saying that people become more religious or maintain their religiosity while they're in college. There's no real consistent finding here. It's not that people are radicalized or atheized or anything like that in college. It's really largely inconclusive. But maybe they'll come back when they have kids. Hey, you know, they have to get the baptism. We'll get them into Sunday school. They'll become practicing again. That's possible. But think back to the differential fertility, the reproductive evangelism of the last slide. If this emergent adulthood period is as significant as it is, people aren't going straight from, you know, college or trade school or work into child rearing. There's a larger gap of time there. There's a larger gap of time for people to become disconnected or to become connected in other ways. So maybe they'll come back when they move back to town. I will say there is something to this. Distance does make a difference. From the people I interviewed who are no longer practicing, even those who feel very distant from the church as a whole, they generally feel a stronger connection to their home congregation than they do to Lutheranism or the ELCA or even Christianity. People feel more connected to their home congregation. So again, a maybe. Okay, maybe they'll come back when they die. Let's not bank on that one. The reality is we just need to be better about maintaining relationships. If we do get some of those touchstones, those touch points of people having kids and for baptisms, of people moving back to town and having a homecoming, we should make sure we build connections and maintain connections. When people go off to college, when younger people go off to college or go off to school or move to a new town, we need to maintain those connections because they are important and they're a part of what we are. Okay, how did the church down the street get so many new people? Well, we have a rich Lutheran tradition and a rich Christian tradition that we trace back so far. That does come with some baggage. It does. Lutherans, we've done stuff historically, we've done good stuff, we've done bad stuff, we've done bad stuff that we're still apologizing for. We also, among that baggage, we have some old buildings, some of which are not ADA friendly or have bad parking. And I will say those are demonstrably real factors that happen. They do impact people's worship. Kind of alongside this, usually in the same breath, you'll hear, if we have a contemporary service, then the young people will come. Perhaps I should have said earlier that with change in the church, there are no magic bullets. If you want to have a contemporary service, go ahead. If you have the need, desire, if you feel like that will fill a role in your worship life as a community, go for it. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with them. It's simply not going to be a silver bullet. Claims of sheep stealing. We're going to look at the numbers on this. You know, is that cool hip church down the street, are they stealing our members? It does happen, but I will say the data says mostly no. Let's take a look. Okay, first of all, this is just a look at the change comparing the change in mainline Christianity as a whole since 1988 and the ELCA, they tend to mirror each other, and mainline Lutheranism does tend to sort of follow similar trends. But if you can see here, there has been an uptick. Sometime around 2015, 2014, the moderate or liberal Protestants, generally the mainline, have experienced an uptick in, for lack of a better term, market share, whereas the ELCA has continued to slide down. This is something to keep an eye on. It's a little early to make too many claims in this. I have some theories that maybe we'll talk about another time. Among these claims, though, are claims that people are going to the LCMC or the NALC. And I'll just say here, people were leaving long before the Ecumenical Agreement of 2001 or the LGBTQ stances of 2009. Of the 2 million people that have left in the last 20 years, around 300,000 of them, or less than 1/6, have gone to those organizations. So it's not that. Let's keep looking here. Switching, people switching in versus switching out. If you look here, actually, more people have switched into Lutheranism from another denomination than have left. That green number is higher than the yellow. So we are actually gaining in net switchers, if you will. But the real curiosity and the real curiosity of all this change comes right here. Other change, you've all filled this out, the other additions, other removals. This has consistently been our biggest place of loss, our biggest place of change. And as far as our reporting, goes, we don't really know what this is. It seems to be indicated that it's people who are going nowhere. People who, I hate to say it this way, but people who left without saying goodbye. So how did church down the street get so many people? Well, I don't think the church down the street is really the problem. Okay, this one, bad Christians make us look bad. Yes, yes, they do. They really, really do. I wasn't going to say much more about this. It's self-evident, but it's worth a little discussion here. Scandals that happen in the church that make headlines, any headline that makes us look bad makes us all look bad. Hypocrisy, also in the headlines, in personal experience, makes us look bad. Infighting and rudeness. To talk a little bit about my interviewees, the former Lutherans, a lot of them have experienced infighting and rudeness that have left a bad taste in their mouth. They've had comments made to them. They've seen too much behind the curtain, if you will. It makes a difference, and it really impacts people in the long term. And some people will never come back because of those things. Okay, last one here. But we have the best theology. We do, right? We do. We have the best theology. A couple things to touch on here, though. First of all, Arminianism is the dominant theology kind of circulating. It's what's in the air. That is the oversimplified saying here, but basically God says yes, we can say no. It embraces the doctrine of grace. The word grace is out there. It's been widely embraced. It's not necessarily used the way or to the fullness that we Lutherans use it, but if you go into virtually any Christian church, you will hear about God's grace, God's goodness, how God's grace is first, and our response to it is, all we can do is respond to it. I mean, it's close enough that to say grace is what makes us unique might not get very far. I feel like saying that Lutherans are unique because of grace is like Coke saying it's unique because it's a cola. I'm not affiliated with Coke. Okay. So we need to ask ourselves, what theologically do we have to offer? What parts of Lutheranism, what components of our theology do we have to offer? I think there's a great area for growth there. Grace is, of course, important, central. We cannot do without it. But what can we add to that conversation that's largely out there? Could we say, hey, simul justus et peccator, right? We can add, oh yeah, we can be saints and sinners, to kind of differentiate ourselves from the works righteousness that has been brought into grace, because boy, doesn't that always infiltrate everything? I have to say this too. Are we a church of dreams? Do we think that if we build it, they will come? If we have the most perfect, liturgically correct worship service, will that draw people? If we preach the best theology, the most Lutheran, pure doctrinal sermon, will the masses see the light and gather? I think we should do those things. I think we should hope for those things. I'll say that much. But here's the reality. Again, through the research, time and time again, most people really don't care about the finer points of doctrine. And that's the truth for people who are irreligious. It's also been found largely true for people who are more religious, that some of these finer points of theology that we get into, I hate to say it, but people don't care. I do. Hopefully you do. We should, and it's important that we have a good theological foundation. But fights about doctrine, and when we get too deep into our sermons with super fine points of doctrine, let's just be aware, be careful, and be intentional about how we interact using doctrine. Let's just say that. I will also say, I don't think this means we have to change or sacrifice the finer points of our doctrine. In fact, I think that we as leaders, as representatives, need to dig deeper and learn it better. And we need to be able to answer the question, what is the difference? And so what? So those are the 7 big major points there, coming through those comments and quotations. I would love to hear from you some more of those types of conversations you've heard for future reflection, for future conversation. I want to leave, though, with a couple thoughts to chew on before our question and answer later on today. First of all, I want to talk about some headlines about faith in decline, because it's out there, right? I want to read you this one. This is from an article in the New York Times. It says that the attendance of church services are decreasing. There is no doubt. We ask the question, whose fault is it? Is it entirely the fault of the people, or are the clergy also responsible? This is something to chew on. I think it's also should note here that this is a headline from 1904 in the New York Times. There's another series of articles here giving reasons why people don't go, such as poorly led worship and squabbles over minor sectarian differences. Those are in articles from 1851. Nothing new under the sun. I think we need to ask ourselves periodically to do a check here, an audit. Why are we worried about decline? Why are we worried about it? Is it because we want stuffed pews and job security for rostered ministers? I think we'd be lying to say that stuffed pews and job security aren't nice, but our motivation needs to be deeper, of course. Do we fear that Christianity is going to disappear? It won't. Christianity is on the rise globally. It has been and continues to be. Even Lutheranism is on the rise. You're aware of this. You've seen this. Finally, I'll ask this possible motivation? Is it because we believe that the Lutheran tradition of Christianity has something to offer? I believe so, and I hope so. And I hope that you feel that that's an adequate answer as well. I think we need to ask ourselves, where can we make actual differences? Part of the reason for this series of questions is some of those questions about the kids. We can't simply generate more Lutheran babies. Doesn't work that way. So where can we make an actual difference? What can we do? How can we make a difference in the way we evangelize, the way we relate with people, the way we communicate, and the way we are as a church? And maybe more specifically, what does our tradition have to offer in 2022? We do have a lot left to offer. We have a deep well of spirituality, of religiosity, of theology that we can draw upon here. Here's the big reality. God has helped the church transform through all kinds of stuff. Who is the Holy Spirit calling us to be? It's the kind of question that we really do always need to be chewing on, but who, in light of these current realities, is the Holy Spirit calling us as the church to be? Where is the Holy Spirit directing us? This is where I stop for now. Thank you so much. And I hope that the other segments are edifying today. And peace.